The night hung over Idaho's Wood River Valley like a sheet of silver glass. The wind brushed across the open pasture, carrying a sound that made every hair on Jack Carver's neck stand on end, a wolf's howl, long and trembling, echoing against the Sawtooth Mountains. Jack had heard that cry before too many times. To him, it was never music. It was warning. He swung open the door of his small ranch house, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other. Beyond the dark fence line, the sheep rustled nervously, the bells around their necks clinking like distant chimes. But tonight felt different. The air was colder, heavier. The red flags of the Fladry line, meant to scare wolves away, fluttered in the moonlight like ribbons of blood. And then he saw it. Just beyond the far post, a shape struggled in the snow, a wolf tangled in a loop of barbed wire. Its fur was matted with frost, its eyes burning with fear and pain. Jack froze. Every instinct told him to raise the rifle, to end the threat before it began. But something in that stare, that wild, desperate stare, held him still. For years he had cursed the wolves for stealing his peace. Yet now the creature before him looked nothing like the monster he'd imagined. It looked alive, fragile, trapped by the same fear that had bound him all his life. He lowered the gun. Slowly. The wolf's chest heaved, the chain cut deeper into its leg. Jack's heart pounded. The world shrank to the sound of its breathing, ragged fast, human almost. "What are you doing out here, boy?" he whispered. The question was more to himself than to the animal. In the distance, thunder rolled. Snow began to fall in tiny spirals, coating the red flags in white. He took a hesitant step forward. Another, then stopped. He didn't know what to do, call for help, walk away, end its pain. But deep down he knew one thing: if he walked away tonight, he'd never forgive himself. He turned back toward the house, toward the phone, toward a decision that would change everything. When dawn finally broke over Sun Valley, the mountains looked carved from glass, sharp blue and cold. Inside a modest farmhouse at the edge of the valley, Jack Carver poured black coffee into a chipped mug, staring out across the white fields. He was 52 years old, weathered by Idaho's winters and years of chasing lost sheep through endless pasture. His hands were cracked like dry bark, his eyes the color of riverstone. Jack had grown up on this land. His father and grandfather had grazed sheep here long before wolves returned. Back then, every boy in town learned the same lesson. A wolf in the hills means loss. He still remembered the night 15 years ago when he'd found his first dead ewe, the carcass torn the snow-stained crimson. He'd sworn that night he'd never forgive the species that did it. But time changes more than fences and seasons. When the Wood River Wolf Project began its outreach, many ranchers slammed their doors. Jack nearly did too. He was tired of scientists telling him how to live, tired of outsiders with clipboards explaining coexistence. Then, one summer evening, a woman in dusty boots showed up at his gate. Maya Ortiz, field coordinator for the project, young, calm-spoken, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent her life in wild places. She didn't start with data or arguments. She started with a question. "What would make your nights easier?" "Mr. Carver." Jack had laughed. "A fence that keeps ghosts out." Instead of leaving, she smiled. "Then, let's build one that works for both sides." Over the next weeks, she brought a small team, biologists, volunteers, even a couple of neighboring ranchers. They stretched Fladry lines across his pasture, long red ribbons that fluttered in the wind, confusing wolves and keeping them away from sheep without harm. They introduced guardian dogs, massive white Great Pyrenees, trained to patrol at night. They helped install motion-triggered lights and a radio system that broadcasted voices whenever a wolf approached. For Jack, it felt strange, like sharing his land with invisible partners. The first nights he barely slept waiting for the howl. but the sheep stayed safe. Soon, something unexpected happened. He started talking with Maya about more than wolves. She told him about the science that most livestock deaths blamed on wolves were actually caused by illness or weather. Less than 1% came from predation. He didn't believe it at first. But every new dawn brought unscathed flocks, and every week the data spoke louder than his doubts. Through her, Jack learned about the idea of non-lethal coexistence, not just fences and ribbons, but respect. Wolves aren't the villains, she said once, leaning on his fence post. They're part of what keeps these valleys alive. Elk, deer, coyotes, they all balance because wolves are here. Jack had grunted something about balance not paying the bills, but the seed was planted. That winter, his ranch became part of a pilot zone, monitored fields, camera traps, and regular reports to the project's database. He hated paperwork, but secretly liked the sense of purpose. For the first time, he felt involved in something larger than his fences. And yet, the fear never fully left. Every howl in the distance still tightened his chest. Every missing lamb still made his heart race before reason caught up. The valley itself reflected that tension, a fragile peace between humans and wilderness. In Sun Valley, ski lodges glittered under mountain peaks, while ranches like Jack's clung to tradition. The wolves roamed those ridges unseen, but always present, their prints appearing on snow like signatures of a hidden pact. On clear mornings, Jack often drove the fence line at sunrise. From the hill above his pasture, the Wood River shimmered through fog, winding between pine forests and open fields. Sometimes in the distance he saw shapes moving along the tree line, maybe deer, maybe wolves. He never looked too long. Still, part of him wondered, what if they're not the enemy anymore? The locals whispered that wolves were getting too close, that one day tragedy would strike again. But for now, the valley was quiet, held together by faith-red ribbons and a fragile promise that coexistence could work. He didn't know that the same promise would soon be tested. Because deep in the forest, a trap was waiting, one that would bring Jack face to face with everything he feared. The storm rolled in without warning. By dusk, the valley sky had turned the color of gunmetal. Wind tore through the cottonwoods, and the smell of snow filled the air. Jack Carver had spent the afternoon repairing a broken fence line near the creek, grumbling about the forecast. He didn't notice the strange silence until the dogs began to bark. Deep, frantic barks, not the kind that chase coyotes, but the kind that signals something's wrong. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the gale. The beam sliced through flurries of snow, catching on the glint of metal-twisted wire along the northern fence. Then he heard it, a low, guttural sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like pain struggling to breathe. He raised the light. There it was. A gray wolf, larger than any dog he'd ever seen, lay half buried in snow. One hind leg caught in a loop of steel cable, not his own trap, but an illegal snare set by someone else. The animal kicked weakly, teeth, bared eyes wild. Jack's pulse thundered. His fingers tightened on the rifle slung over his shoulder. Every memory of shredded sheep and angry town meetings came flooding back. He should end it now. That's what the old Jack would have done. But then the light caught the animal's flank, the fur wet and dark where blood had frozen. The sight hit him like a stone. This wasn't a predator hunting. It was a creature caught in cruelty. He lowered the gun. Slowly he spoke, as if the sound of a calm voice could soften the air. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The wolf's ears twitched, but it didn't snarl. It just breathed shallow and fast. Jack stepped closer, boots sinking into snow. The closer he got, the smaller the wolf seemed, not a monster, but a living thing terrified by something man had made. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking, and dialed Maya Ortiz. Her voice came through the static. "Jack. What's wrong? I've got one. Caught in wire. Looks bad. Don't touch it. Stay back and keep the dogs away. I'll call Fish and Game and head your way." He hesitated, eyes on the blood darkening the snow. "It's freezing out here, Maya. He won't last." "Then keep your distance and talk to it. Let it know you're there." He almost laughed. Talk to it. It sounded ridiculous, but he tried. "Hang in there, buddy. Help's coming." Minutes crawled by like hours. The wind howled across the valley. Snow swirled around the two of them, man and beast, frozen in an unspoken truce. When Maya's truck headlights finally cut through the storm relief washed over him, two wardens followed her, carrying tranquilizer gear and thick gloves. "Good call," one said, crouching by the animal. "This one's lucky you found it. These illegal snares can slice tendons clean through." Jack turned away as they sedated the wolf. He didn't want to see the needle. He just kept watching its chest rise and fall slower, calmer, until it slept. Under the floodlights, they freed the leg, mangled but not broken. Maya wrapped it gently with gauze and spoke softly to the unconscious animal. "We'll take him to the field center. He might pull through." Jack nodded, still silent. The rifle hung useless at his side, heavy with shame, and something he couldn't yet name. As they loaded the wolf into the truck, the moon broke through the clouds. For a moment, the silver light touched its fur, and the valley seemed to hold its breath. Jack reached out and brushed the snow from the Fladry line. The red flags shivered in the wind. "You ever think," he murmured to Maya, "maybe they're not our problem. Maybe we're theirs?" She gave him a tired smile. "You're starting to sound like one of us." He didn't answer. He just watched the taillights fade into the distance, carrying the sleeping wolf toward the unknown. That night, the valley fell silent again. But for Jack, the sound of that breathing, faint and fragile, echoed long after the trucks were gone. He stood there until the snow covered the last trace of blood. And for the first time in years, he felt something like hope. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of mercy would open a door to a world he'd spent his life fearing. The Wood River Field Center sat at the edge of the forest, a cluster of weather-worn cabins and metal sheds. Inside one of them, the rescued wolf lay sedated on a steel table. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Maya Ortiz stood beside the veterinarians reading off vitals. Jack Carver watched from the doorway, his hat clutched in both hands like a guilty man waiting for judgment. He'd never been inside a rescue facility before. The hum of machines, the quiet efficiency, it all felt foreign. He'd spent 50 years tending sheep, patching fences, counting losses. He'd never seen anyone fight this hard for the life of a predator. "Pulse steady," said the vet, tightening the bandage. "Deep tissue damage, but no break." Jack exhaled. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. They called the wolf shadow after the valley where it was found. It seemed fitting, a creature caught between light and dark. For the next few days, Jack couldn't stay away. He told himself he was just checking on the project's progress, but Maya saw through it. "You could have walked away," she said one morning, handing him coffee. "Most people would have." "Maybe I'm not most people anymore," he answered quietly. Through the observation glass, Shadow slept, leg wrapped in gauze, chest rising slow and steady. When it stirred, its eyes opened, golden, wary, ancient. Jack felt that same shiver he'd felt in the snow, only softer now, threaded with awe. Every visit chipped away a little more of the fear that had built up over years. Maya taught him how to read wolf behavior, the way ears shift with mood, how a tail's movement can mean calm instead of threat. He listened like a student, surprised by how much he didn't know. Wolves weren't bloodthirsty killers. They were family animals, loyal, territorial, intelligent. They hunted to eat, not to destroy. Maya showed him camera footage from the surrounding mountains, wolves traveling single file through snow, noses low, pups nipping playfully at elders. The scenes looked nothing like the nightmares he'd carried. "They're not out to get us, Jack," she said. "They're just trying to live same as we are." That line stayed with him. Weeks passed. Shadow healed fast. The fur around his wound began to grow back silver, the muscle tightening with strength. Each day he tested his leg, pacing the enclosure gaze, always toward the mountains. Jack sometimes stood outside the pen, hands deep in pockets watching the animal circle. Once Shadow stopped and looked directly at him, not hostile, not grateful, just aware. Two beings who shared a valley, a sky, and now a story. One afternoon, a group of students visited the center. Jack helped Maya demonstrate the project's non-lethal tools: fladry lines that flapped in the wind like banners of peace, guardian dogs calm and alert beside the sheep, acoustic devices that used sound to divert curious wolves. The kids listened wide-eyed as Maya explained how understanding predator behavior saved both livestock and wolves. Jack found himself adding comments, voice steady, almost proud. "Most of our losses came from sickness, not wolves," he told them. "You fix that, you fix the fear." That night, back on his ranch, he checked the herd under a cold sky. The red ribbons gleamed in moonlight. The Great Pyrenees lay quietly near the gate. Everything felt balanced, fragile, but right. Then he heard a faint, familiar howl drifting from miles away. Not menacing, just a note of presence. He smiled without meaning to. Shadow was healing and calling home. Days turned into weeks, snow into meltwater. The valley thawed green, pushing through white. Jack helped the project gather data on wolf movements. He learned to track paw prints, to tell the difference between coyote scat and wolf scat, to identify kill sites by pattern rather than panic. For the first time in his life, he felt part of a conversation rather than a conflict. Still, old habits died hard. Some nights he dreamed of that first carcass from years ago, blood in the snow. But when he woke now, he didn't feel hatred, he felt curiosity. What had driven that wolf to risk coming so close? Back then. Hunger territory. A lost pack. Maybe understanding was the only real weapon he'd ever needed. At the center, Shadow had grown strong enough to walk the full enclosure. The limp was gone. When the caretakers opened the gate to clean, he didn't lunge. He simply stepped back, observing, dignified. "He's ready," Maya said softly. "Soon we'll move him to the release site." Jack nodded, eyes fixed on the wolf. Guess he's got places to be. But part of him didn't want it to end. In that wounded animal, he'd found something unexpected: reflection. A reminder that survival wasn't about dominance. It was about balance. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the sawtooths, he stood by the river where he'd first set his fences. The water glimmered orange, the mountains glowing like fire. He thought of Shadow out there pacing under the same sky, waiting for freedom. "You'll make it," he whispered into the wind. "We both will." Spring in the wood. River Valley was never gentle. When the snowmelt came, it came like a flood, turning quiet streams into roaring torrents and washing away everything that wasn't anchored deep. For weeks, the weather reports warned of heavy rain. Jack Carver, now a cautious believer in forecasts, reinforced his fences and checked every fladry line. The guardian dogs, Bear and Luna, stayed close, restless, sensing something in the air. By late afternoon, the clouds rolled down from the sawtooths, black and swollen. Thunder rattled the windows of the ranch house. Maya Ortiz radioed in from town. "Jack, the upper ridges are flooding. The packs will move lower to stay dry. Keep your herd close to the barn tonight." "Already on it," he said, tying down the last section of fence. The storm hit at dusk. Rain hammered the tin roof. Wind shrieked through the valley. Lightning split the hills in half, illuminating a world that looked wild again. Out in the dark, the sheep bunched together in panic. The Fladry lines whipped like torn sails. Then, a sound Jack hadn't heard in months, a chorus of howls rising over the wind. He froze. There were more than one this time. The radio crackled with static. "Stay inside," Maya warned. "We're monitoring movement on the north slope, possible wolf pack heading down." He looked at the flock, trembling mass of white against mud. If the ribbons came loose, the herd would scatter. He grabbed his slicker and flashlight. Not leaving them. The rain hit his face like needles as he stepped into the storm. Every flash of lightning carved ghostly shapes across the pasture. The dogs barked, holding the line. Then he saw it. The far section of Fladry had collapsed poles, down ribbons tangled in the creek. Beyond that, silhouettes moved, large, deliberate, silent. Wolves. Jack's first instinct was still the same old one: run for the rifle. But he didn't. Not this time. He lifted his radio. "Maya, they're here. North fence. Fladry's down. Copy. Don't engage. Keep light and sound high. We're dispatching a team." He switched on the floodlight. The beam sliced through rain, catching eyes that glowed gold for a second before disappearing. The wolves hesitated. He shouted, waved his arms, clapped metal pans, every tactic Maya had taught. The dogs barked in rhythm, circling the sheep. It worked until one movement stopped him cold. A single wolf stepped forward, calm, measured. Its fur darker than the rest, gait uneven but strong. Shadow. Jack felt the world tilt. "You've got to be kidding me." Shadow stared across the field, unmoving as thunder rolled. For a long moment, it wasn't predator and prey, just two survivors measuring distance. Behind Shadow, the pack wavered. The leader gave a low growl, half command, half question. Jack took a breath and lowered the floodlight slightly, letting the beam rest between them. "Go on, boy," he whispered. "Take them home." Shadow turned, looked once more, then lifted his head and howled a deep, resonant call that cut through wind and rain. The others answered. One by one, they backed away, disappearing into the curtain of water. The field fell silent again, except for the pounding rain and the bleating of frightened sheep. Maya's truck arrived minutes later, headlights slicing through the storm. She jumped out, soaked, breathless. "You okay, Jack?" Nodded, still staring into the darkness. He was here. Who? Shadow. She followed his gaze. Nothing but rain and fog. "You sure?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'm sure." They checked the fence. Half the valley's lines had gone down, but the sheep were safe. Not a single loss. By dawn, the storm had passed. The land steamed under weak sunlight. Maya took photos of the flattened ribbons, the paw prints in mud, evidence of the night's silent negotiation. "You realize what happened," she said. "You just proved coexistence works even in a crisis." "No," Jack said quietly. "He proved it." They stood in the wet grass, watching mist curl over the hills. Somewhere far above, a distant howl echoed low, steady, proud. For the first time, Jack didn't hear threat. He heard respect. The storm passed, but the noise didn't. By the next morning, the valley was buzzing with talk radio shows, coffee shops, and online forums, all filled with the same headline: "Local rancher protects wolves during livestock threat." Jack Carver's name spread faster than floodwater. Some called him brave, others called him a fool. At the feed store, men he'd worked alongside for decades stopped talking when he walked in. "Guess you're one of them now," one muttered, not meeting his eyes. Jack just paid for his supplies and left. But the words stayed with him longer than he'd admit. Maya tried to reassure him. "You did the right thing. The data speaks for itself. 0 losses, despite the storm." "Data doesn't fix pride," Jack said quietly. "These folks think I've switched sides." and in some ways he had from fear to faith. But the valley wasn't ready for faith yet. A week later, a regional news crew arrived, cameras and bright smiles, hiding sharper intentions. They interviewed Maya, cutting her answers into sound bites about controversial coexistence programs funded by outsiders. Jack refused to speak on record, but that didn't stop them. By evening, a clip aired showing his face labeled "The Wolf Farmer." He watched the broadcast in silence. The phrase sounded like a curse and a blessing all at once. That night, a pickup truck slowed near his gate. Headlights swept the pasture. A voice yelled something he couldn't make out, followed by the sound of a beer can hitting the fence. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew what they meant. The next morning, he found one of the red fladry lines cut clean through. The message was clear. Not everyone wanted coexistence. At the Wood River Wolf Project office, Maya faced her own storm. County officials questioned the funding and the safety of encouraging wolves near livestock areas. "We're not encouraging them," she argued. "We're managing them responsibly. The alternative is chaos or extinction." The board listened expressionless. Bureaucracy moved slower than the mountains eroded, and change frightened people more than predators ever did. Meanwhile, Jack kept working his ranch. He mended fences, replaced flags, and ignored whispers, but the tension hung over the valley like unspent thunder. One evening, he attended a town meeting at the community hall, a place where coffee was strong and tempers stronger. A crowd of 50 gathered ranchers in denim jackets and hats heavy with weather. The sheriff stood at the front, along with a representative from the state's wildlife department. The talk began polite loss reports, grazing permits, compensation rates, until someone mentioned wolves. "Those predators are coming back because people like her," one man shouted, pointing at Maya. And him, another, added eyes on Jack. The wolf whisperer. Jack clenched his jaw. Maya started to respond, but he raised a hand. He stood hat in hand, voice low but steady. "I used to hate them," he said. "Swore I'd kill the next one I saw. But hate doesn't protect your herd, knowledge does. Last month my pasture was surrounded by wolves during that storm. Not one sheep died. Not one. Because I learned to work with the land, not against it." The room quieted, though a few scoffed. "You saying we should just let 'em roam free? I'm saying we stop letting fear make our choices for us." The wildlife officer nodded slightly. "Mr. Carver's data is consistent with our reports. Non-lethal deterrents are proving effective." For a moment, reason flickered like candlelight in a windstorm. After the meeting, some still glared, but others approached quiet men asking quiet questions. "How much them fladry lines cost? Where'd you get those dogs trained?" Change never came all at once. It came like thaw, slow, reluctant, inevitable. Later that night, Jack sat on his porch. The valley spread below him. The fladry ribbons glimmered faintly under the moon, repaired and strong again. In the distance, a single howl rose, then another farther away. He didn't flinch anymore. He just listened. Maybe he thought this is what peace sounds like, not silence, but understanding. Summer crept into the Wood River Valley quietly. The snow was gone. The pastures were green again, and the mountains looked less like walls and more like doors. At the rescue center, the gates of the final enclosure swung open for the first time in months. Shadow, stronger now, heavier, his coat shining silver under the sun, paced in wide circles, testing every inch of space. Maya read from the clipboard. Vitals normal, behavior stable, weight perfect for release. Jack Carver stood a few steps away, arms folded. He should have felt proud. Instead, there was a weight behind his ribs he couldn't name. He'd visited every week, helped fix fences, hauled feed, even built shade covers. But lately, he'd started lingering at the edge of the pen longer than usual, just watching. You know it's time, Maya said gently. He nodded. Yeah, I just didn't think it'd come this fast. She smiled. It always does. The release site was chosen carefully, a high meadow near the Sawtooth Wilderness, far from ranches and roads. The project team set up early checking tranquilizer doses, cameras, and telemetry tags. When the truck arrived, Shadow lay calm inside the transport crate, breathing evenly. Jack helped unload, though his hands trembled more than he'd admit. You want to do the honors? Maya asked. He looked at the latch at the dark shape beyond the bars. Me. You found him. You saved him. Seems right you're the one to set him free. Jack's throat tightened. He took a long breath of the cold mountain air. Pine resin melting snow, sunlight, the smell of everything wild. He crouched beside the crate. For a moment, neither man nor wolf moved. Then softly he spoke. You're healed now, Shadow. Go on. Show 'em we can live together. He unhooked the latch. The door creaked open. Shadow didn't rush out. He stepped forward slowly, nose lifting to the wind. His eyes caught Jack's for a heartbeat, amber against blue. Then, with a low rumble that sounded almost like a farewell, he trotted out into the meadow. The others watched in silence as he broke into a run, first awkward, then powerful, bounding through grass and sunlight until he was nothing but motion. At the ridge, he stopped, turned back once, and raised his head. The howl rolled through the valley, long and low, echoing off the granite peaks. It wasn't sorrow. It was promise. Jack swallowed hard. Maya touched his shoulder. He remembers. Maybe Jack whispered. Or maybe he's just saying thanks. They stood there until the sound faded into wind. Later that evening, back at his ranch, the world felt different. The pastures glowed gold under the setting sun. The sheep grazed peacefully, but where there was once a restless emptiness, there was now quiet, not absence, peace. He walked along the fence line, running his hand over the new fladry ribbons. For years he'd seen fences as walls. Now they felt more like boundaries of respect, a way to say, this is yours and this is mine, without blood in between. He stopped at the northern corner, the same place where he'd first found the trapped wolf. The snow was long gone, but he could still picture it, the fear, the decision, the moment everything changed. Funny thing, he murmured, saving him might have saved me too. The guardian dogs trotted beside him, tails wagging. From far off, across the darkening hills, a faint howl rose, distant but familiar. Jack smiled. You made it home, boy. He tipped his hat toward the mountains. For the first time in a lifetime of fences, Jack Carver no longer felt divided from the wild. He was part of its story, not its enemy, not its hero, just a man who finally learned to listen. A year later, the Wood River Valley looked reborn. The grass stood tall again, the river ran clear, and the sound of howling no longer carried fear through the valley, it carried balance. Jack Carver's ranch had changed too. The fences were cleaner, the red fladry ribbons freshly strung. The old No Wolves sign that once hung by his gate was gone. In its place, a simple wooden plaque carved with 2 words, Coexistence Lives. Every morning, before the sun crested the mountains, Jack walked the same fence line he'd once patrolled with a rifle. Now he carried only a thermos of coffee and a field notebook. When he spotted tracks near the riverbank, he didn't curse anymore. He marked them with a smile and a pen. At the Wood River Project headquarters, the walls were covered in maps dotted with colored pins, red for ranches, blue for wolf sightings, green for success stories. Maya stood before a group of new volunteers explaining the valley's transformation. This is what coexistence looks like when communities lead, she said, pointing at Jack's property, marked with a small star. Last year, 0 sheep lost, 0 wolves killed. In the back of the room, Jack raised a hand awkwardly. "And better sleep all around," he added, earning a ripple of laughter. He wasn't a man of speeches, but he'd become something else, an example. After the session, a younger rancher approached him. "Mr. Carver, I used to think you were crazy. But those dogs and fladry lines they work. I lost less this year than any in the past decade." Jack grinned. Crazy's not so bad if it keeps the peace. That afternoon, he drove Maya back to his ranch to show her something. As the truck bounced down the dirt road, the valley spread wide before them, a canvas of green framed by snow-tipped peaks. The guardian dogs trotted along the pasture tails wagging in the wind. "You ever miss him?" Maya asked. "Every damn day," Jack replied, eyes on the horizon. "But sometimes I hear him out there. It's enough." He stopped near the northern fence, the same place where everything had begun. From there you could see miles of forest, the blue shadow of the sawtooths in the distance. As they stood, the wind shifted, carrying a faint sound through the valley, a low, familiar howl. Maya smiled. "You think that's him?" Jack listened, eyes soft. "I know it is." They stayed silent, the sound echoing and fading like a prayer answered. Months passed. The valley entered another winter, gentler this time. Snow dusted the peaks, and the river froze in patterns that looked like veins of glass. At night, the stars burned bright enough to make the world feel close again. One evening, Jack sat by his fireplace flipping through a worn notebook filled with notes, paw-print sketches, and fladry maintenance logs. Between the pages lay a photo him and Maya standing beside the crate the day Shadow ran free. He turned it over. On the back, in Maya's handwriting, "For the man who chose compassion over fear." He smiled, leaning back in his chair. Outside, the dogs barked once, not alarmed, just alert. Then, from far up the ridge, came a single answering howl. Jack closed his eyes. "Welcome home, old friend," he whispered. The camera would linger on that image, a man and a valley at peace, both changed by one decision made on a winter night long ago. In the end, the story of the Wood River Valley wasn't about wolves or sheep. It was about understanding and what happens when we choose it over fear. Jack Carver never set out to become a symbol. He was just a man trying to protect what was his. But along the way, he learned something simple and powerful, that protecting what's ours doesn't have to mean destroying what's theirs. The wolves didn't vanish. They learned to live within the rhythm of the valley again, and the valley learned to live with them. Through projects like the Wood River Wolf Project, coexistence